Three men in tactical vests kicked in a family's front door, claiming to be HOA enforcement, but they had no badges, no authority, and no right. At the center was Roger Mason, a disgraced ex-board member with a personal grudge and a dangerous sense of power. But everything changed when 6-year-old Jack, terrified, grabbed his dad's shotgun, not to fight, but to protect. And just wait until you see how this shocking confrontation unfolded, and why in the end justice didn't just knock, it kicked back. It was the kind of morning Jared Walsh used to fight for, peaceful, ordinary, untouched by the world outside. The scent of fresh coffee drifted through the kitchen, mingling with the quiet buzz of cartoons playing softly in the background. His 6-year-old son, Jack, was nestled on the couch in a tangle of superhero blankets, legs dangling off the edge, fingers lazily dipping into a bowl of cereal. It was 6:37 a.m. Jared sipped from his mug, exhaled, and let himself pause, just for a moment. He didn't know it yet, but it would be the last peaceful moment he'd get for a long time. Then came the sound, a sudden, violent crack. Not a knock, not a doorbell, but something heavier, sharper, deliberate. The entire front door exploded inward, crashing against the hallway wall with a force that shook the frame. Splinters of wood scattered like shrapnel across the floor. Jared's mug slipped from his hands and shattered on the tile, hot coffee splashing across his bare feet. Before he could process what was happening, they were already inside. 3 men, large, imposing, wearing tactical vests that looked straight out of a low-budget cop show. The bold white print across their chests read HOA enforcement. No uniforms, no name tags, no badges, no official markings beyond the vests they probably ordered online. One of them, tall, with a buzz cut, and mirrored sunglasses despite the indoor light, barked out, "Compliance check! Stay back!" The second man charged forward with a practiced kind of aggression, shoving Jared to the ground without warning. The impact knocked the breath from his lungs as his back hit the floor, palms skidding across shattered porcelain. Jack screamed. It wasn't just a scared noise. It was pure panic, the kind that shoots out of a child when the world flips upside down without warning. His cereal bowl clattered to the floor as he scrambled backward, trying to disappear into the cushions of the couch. Jared turned his head just enough to see the third man, clipboard in hand, scanning the room like it was some kind of tactical mission. But there was no protocol, no explanation, no cause. "On what grounds?" Jared gasped, trying to sit up. "Violation of property appearance codes," the man with the clipboard said flatly. "Failure to respond to HOA notices." Jared froze. OA, the Homeowners Association. That's who these men were claiming to represent. But Jared knew this neighborhood's HOA inside and out. He'd lived here for 6 years, attended the meetings, paid the dues. There were rules, sure, but nothing in any agreement allowed this. No one had authority to kick in a door without warning. No one had the right to enter a home uninvited like this, and certainly not over lawn height or a mailbox color. "This isn't a legal entry," Jared said, now on one knee. "You don't have the right to be in my house." But the men ignored him. One of them stepped toward the hallway, toward the bedroom, toward where Jack might run. Panic swelled in Jared's chest. He tried to stand. "My son is in here. You need to back off, now." Still nothing. And in that moment it hit him with full clarity. This wasn't about rules. This was personal. Someone wanted to send a message, and Jared wasn't going to let them do it with his child in the house. He wasn't a cop. He wasn't a federal agent. He wasn't even a licensed investigator. But that didn't stop Roger Mason from pulling on a tactical vest and kicking down a neighbor's door like he had a badge in his back pocket and the law at his heels. The truth? Roger was nothing more than a disgraced former HOA board member, and the man who masterminded the morning ambush. For a time, he had real authority in the neighborhood. He chaired meetings, signed off on minor home violations, and got to play the part of local leader. It fed something in him, a need to be in control. But power, even small, does strange things to the wrong kind of people. And for Roger, it wasn't enough to enforce rules. He wanted to be obeyed. His downfall began a year earlier. at a homeowners meeting that most neighbors barely even remember. But Jared would never forget. Back then, Jared had stood up during the open discussion portion of the meeting and calmly, but publicly, questioned where the HOA fees were going. He brought receipts, quite literally, printouts showing double charges, unexplained expenses, and contractor payments that didn't match the work being done. And then he'd looked directly at Roger and said, "This isn't how a community operates. This is how a personal empire runs, and we didn't vote for that." There was a moment of stunned silence. Roger didn't respond, but his face said everything, humiliation dressed as a tight smile. He lost his seat 2 months later, voted out after a wave of resident complaints. To most, that was the end of the story, a local tyrant, removed by the system. But Jared had unknowingly done something much bigger. He made Roger Mason feel small, and Roger never forgot it. In the months that followed, he stewed. He watched Jared's house from across the street. He collected photos of supposed violations. A trash can left out too long, a flag hung a few inches too low, a minor garage paint mismatch. None of it mattered. None of it justified action. But Roger wasn't looking for justice. He was building a case for revenge. And when the neighborhood moved on, Roger didn't. He found two kindred spirits. Dale Rourke, a former mall security supervisor known for issuing warnings no one asked for, and Kevin Brill, an ex-night shift watchman who once told neighbors he read military blogs for tactical insight. Together, they created their own narrative. They weren't disgraced. They were defenders of order. They weren't angry. They were committed. They started calling themselves the HOA Enforcement Team, as if that was a real title anyone had ever heard of. In their minds, they weren't just allowed to act. They were obligated. They studied entry tactics online. They printed off neighborhood maps. They picked uniforms. They planned it all. The early morning hour, the loud entry, the confusion. Not because it was legal, but because they believed no one would stop them. For Roger, it wasn't just about the bylaws anymore. It was personal. He wanted to remind Jared what happens when you embarrass a man who lives for control. What he didn't count on, what none of them saw coming, was a 6-year-old standing in the hallway with a shotgun. But that moment hadn't arrived yet. At this stage, all Roger saw was the finish line to his grudge, and he was walking through Jared's front door to cross it. In the chaos that filled the living room, voices raised, footsteps pounding, furniture pushed aside like paper, Jack ran. He wasn't thinking. He was reacting the only way a terrified 6-year-old could when his world was collapsing in real time. Small feet padded quickly across the hall. He didn't scream, didn't cry out for help. Not yet. He just moved fast and instinctively, the way he'd once seen animals do when startled. Flight before fight. But in his young mind, something deeper was stirring, the need to protect. He remembered what his dad had told him once, during a stormy night when the power had gone out and he'd been too scared to sleep. "You're always safe here. No matter what happens, I'll protect you. That's what dads do." Now, his dad was on the floor, and the people in the house weren't there to help. He knew that much. Jack burst into the bedroom and dropped to the floor, crawling beneath the edge of the bed. His tiny fingers searched the shadowy space until they found the hard, cold shape he remembered only seeing once, when Jared had cleaned it and immediately locked it away. The lockbox was open. Jared had taken the gun out earlier that week to check it after local break-in reports and hadn't yet stored it again. Jack didn't know how to hold it right. He didn't know how it worked. He just knew it looked big and real, and it made him feel like he was doing something, anything. He returned to the hallway, barefoot, hair tousled, tears streaking down his cheeks. The shotgun was heavy, too heavy for a child, but he held it with both arms, the way he'd seen people in movies do. It trembled in his grasp, the barrel dipping slightly from the weight, but it was unmistakably pointed toward the 3 men in black vests. And then, everything stopped. The noise, the movement, even the air seemed to still. Roger Mason turned first. His eyes widened, Jared, still on the floor, twisted just enough to see the shape of his son standing at the edge of the hallway, and the breath caught in his throat. His heart seized. For a second, he couldn't even find the words. Jack's face was a mix of fear and confusion. His lip quivered. His knees shook. But he didn't lower the gun. In that frozen moment, all the chaos unraveled into a single, shared realization. A child, felt so afraid, so unsafe, that he believed this was what he had to do to keep his family safe. Roger slowly lifted his hands, uncertain whether to speak or stay silent. Dale and Kevin stood behind him, eyes locked on the barrel, as if it might roar to life any second. No one knew what to do next. Even the so-called enforcers were paralyzed, not by the weapon, but by the weight of what they had caused. And in the middle of it all, Jared finally found his voice, soft, steady, measured. "Jack, it's okay, I'm here. You don't need to hold that. Put it down, buddy. I've got you." Jack blinked, tears falling freely now. His arms dropped just a little. Enough. Jared pushed himself up, ignoring the pain in his back and the sting in his palms. He crossed the space between them slowly, one hand out, never breaking eye contact. "It's over now, son. You don't have to be the brave one. That's my job." And with shaking hands, Jack let go. Jared caught the shotgun, knelt down, and wrapped his arms around the boy. Jack clung to him tightly, his small body trembling in his father's embrace. Behind them, the silence was still thick, not from peace, but from shock. Because in that moment, all three men realized what they had done. Not just the door, not just the invasion, but what they'd forced a child to become. Even for a few seconds. "No!" The word tore from Jared's throat. Raw, urgent, unfiltered. His voice cut through the silence like a crack of thunder. He stumbled to his feet, ignoring the pain radiating through his shoulder, and rushed toward his son. Jack was still standing there in the hallway, clutching the shotgun with trembling arms, his eyes filled with a fear no child should ever carry. Jared dropped to one knee, face level with his son's, and placed his hands gently around the weapon. "It's okay, buddy. I've got it now. You're safe." Slowly, carefully, he took the shotgun and lowered it. Jack didn't resist. The tension in his small body collapsed all at once, and he fell into his father's arms, sobbing, holding on like a drowning child to a life raft. Jared held him tightly, one arm around his back, the other around his head, shielding him from the scene behind. And behind them, for the first time, the three men in tactical vests froze. They weren't shouting now. They weren't advancing. They were just standing there, silent, uncertain. It was like the spell had broken. The smallest of the three, Kevin, shifted on his feet. His voice, when it came, was barely above a whisper. "This isn't what we planned." Jared's head turned, slow and deliberate. His eyes, red, furious, focused, locked onto the man who'd spoken. He stood, placing Jack gently behind him. "You planned something? You planned to kick in my door? Scare my son so badly he thought he had to defend me? What was this about? A fence? A mailbox color? A patch of grass?" His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. The sharp edge of contained rage carried louder than a shout ever could. The three impostors looked at each other, no longer so sure of themselves. Roger, who had led the charge with unshakable arrogance, now stared at the floor, jaw tight, but silent. Jared didn't blink. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, one thumb swipe, 3 digits, 911. The silence deepened. "Yes," Jared said calmly into the receiver. "I need officers at my home immediately. I've had an unlawful forced entry by 3 men impersonating enforcement officers. My child was involved." A pause. His voice softened for just a moment. "Yes, he's okay. Just shaken." Jack peeked out from behind his father's side, clutching the hem of his shirt. His fingers wouldn't stop moving. Jared placed a reassuring hand on his head without looking away from the men. "They're still here," he said. "I'm recording everything now." He turned the phone, camera facing outward. Roger took one step back. Jared stepped forward. Go ahead. Tell them who you are. Say it for the record. Say what authority you think you have in my home. No answer. That's what I thought. He hit record. The silence inside the house didn't last long. Minutes later, the stillness outside shattered with the sudden flicker of red and blue lights dancing across the windows and washing over the living room walls like waves of distant thunder. 2 patrol cars slid quietly to the curb, followed by an unmarked vehicle. Doors opened. Boots touched pavement with calm, practiced precision. This was the sound of real authority. Not shouted bravado, not unearned aggression, just trained readiness. Jared opened the door himself. His voice was steady, his shoulders squared, but the pain in his eyes said more than words could. Behind him, Jack sat curled in the corner, and the 3 intruders stood in a clumsy line, suddenly unsure of where to look or how to stand. "Are they still inside?" the lead officer asked. Jared nodded once. "Any weapons visible?" "No," Jared replied, "but they forced entry. One of them shoved me. My son was involved. I have everything on camera." The officers entered with calm efficiency, not with drawn weapons, but with clear, focused intent. Within seconds, they separated the 3 men from Jared, placing each in different parts of the room, asking names, identification, intentions. Roger tried to speak first, starting with, "We're part of—" "Please don't interrupt," one officer said sharply. "We'll get your side, but not yet." One of the younger officers found Jack first. He crouched beside him on the living room floor. "Hey, buddy, I'm Officer Riley. You doing okay?" Jack didn't answer right away. He looked up with wide eyes, a blanket now around his shoulders, passed to him by one of the EMTs who had quietly arrived moments later. Jared stood a few steps away, arms crossed, staying close but letting the moment happen. "Want to sit outside?" Riley offered gently. "We've got a warm blanket and some juice." Jack nodded. Minutes later, he was sitting on the porch, legs swinging over the edge of the steps, hands wrapped tightly around a small thermos of apple juice with the department logo on the side. The flashing lights reflected in his eyes as he watched from a distance, far enough to be safe, but close enough to feel part of what was happening. Inside, the unraveling was fast and clinical. The officers reviewed footage from Jared's security system. They watched the entry, the shouting, the shoving. They saw Jack, barefoot in the hallway, holding the shotgun. They didn't say much, didn't need to. Statements were taken, IDs verified, and before long, each of the 3 intruders stood in handcuffs. No resistance, no protests, just the weight of consequences finally catching up. When they passed Jared on their way out, one of the men tried to avoid his eyes. Jared didn't flinch. He simply stood there, not as a victim, but as a father who had protected his home the way no one else could. As the cars pulled away, Officer Riley approached one last time. "We'll file the full report tonight. You'll have case numbers, and you'll get a call from the detective unit by Monday. You did the right thing, Mr. Walsh." Jared nodded. The adrenaline hadn't faded yet, but something else had begun to settle. Not peace exactly, but order, a return to reality. He glanced back toward the porch, where Jack was still sipping juice quietly, his legs wrapped in the oversized blanket. The lights on the street began to fade as the last cruiser pulled away. For the first time that morning, Jared exhaled. The real world was back, and it was finally on his side. The story didn't stay behind Jared's front door for long. By the next morning, the neighborhood was buzzing. People passed along the details faster than any newsletter ever had. 3 men in vests, a forced entry, a child with a shotgun. At first, there was shock, then outrage. What unsettled everyone most wasn't just that it happened, but who had done it. The men claimed to represent the HOA, a group meant to maintain landscaping, parking rules, and neighborly disputes, not storm into homes. Emergency meetings were called, yards filled with quiet tension. At the first HOA gathering after the event, tempers flared. Voices rose. Someone yelled, "That could have been my kid!" A petition to dissolve the current board started that night. Within 2 days, It had over 300 signatures. People started showing up at Jared's door, not with demands, but with support. You stood up, whether you wanted to or not. He hadn't planned to become a symbol. He hadn't asked for a movement, but now the whole neighborhood was watching him, asking him to speak, to sue, to keep fighting. Jared didn't know what he'd do next, but one thing was clear: this wasn't going away quietly. The courtroom was packed, not with media at first, but with neighbors, familiar faces from the cul-de-sac, the park, the school pickup line. People who once politely nodded to Jared at the mailbox were now sitting in pew-like benches, watching the front of the room like it was a stage. Because this trial wasn't just about one morning. It was about what that morning meant. The prosecution laid it out clearly. Trespassing. Endangering a minor. Impersonating authority. Each charge backed by video, audio, and sworn testimony. When the footage played, the door being kicked in, the confusion, the shouting, the room held its breath. But it was the moment Jack appeared on screen, barefoot in the hallway, tears on his face, gripping something too big for his hands. That silence turned into something heavier. Even the judge looked away for a second, and then came Jared. He took the stand with quiet composure. No theatrics, no need. His voice was steady, but every word hit like a stone in still water. They didn't just break into my house. They broke my son's sense of safety. He thought he had to protect me. At 6 years old. The jury didn't blink. The defense tried to soften the act, calling it a misunderstanding, a poorly executed inspection, even a community miscommunication. But the facts didn't bend. Their vests weren't standard. Their entry wasn't authorized. Their behavior wasn't defensible. The argument fell apart under cross-examination, especially when Roger Mason tried to justify the operation as community-driven. One juror visibly shook their head. Another folded their arms and didn't unfold them for the rest of the trial. When the time came for the verdicts, the courtroom was still again, but this time the silence felt like justice taking a breath before it spoke. Guilty, on all counts. For all three: trespassing, endangering the welfare of a child, criminal impersonation. Roger Mason's confident posture faltered. The hint of a smirk he'd carried through most of the proceedings disappeared as the bailiff approached. His wrists were cuffed, and this time he didn't speak. Dale and Kevin followed quietly, eyes low. No cheers, no dramatic outbursts, just the sound of closure. As they were led away, Jared remained seated. He didn't celebrate. He didn't smile. He just closed his eyes for a second and thought, Jack is safe. That's all I ever wanted. The courtroom emptied slowly, but the feeling lingered. Not just relief, but something deeper. The truth had been heard, and this time it mattered. The court case ended, but the healing had only begun. For Jack, recovery didn't happen overnight. The shadows of that morning still lingered. In dreams, in sudden noises, in the way he looked toward the door before a bed. Jared noticed how tightly his son clung to his hand at school drop-off, how quickly he turned the TV down when loud scenes played. So they took a quiet step: therapy. A warm, sunlit office with soft toys on shelves and a gentle voice who listened more than she spoke. Week by week, Jack began to open up. Not all at once, but piece by piece. He stopped waking up in tears. He stopped asking if the bad men were coming back. He started smiling again, and one morning he said, I feel strong now, like my house is safe again. For Jared, the healing came through action. He changed the locks, reinforced the doors, installed a new alarm system, and bought a safe, not just for valuables, but for peace of mind. He cleared the broken door frame that had been sitting in the garage for months and replaced it with new oak. Symbolically, it felt like closing the last open wound in the house. The neighborhood changed too. The HOA, once a silent overseer of yard height and mailbox color, was dissolved by majority vote. In its place came a neutral, outside management company, transparent, limited, and accountable. No more self-appointed authority. No more backyard politics with real-life consequences. Some residents wanted Jared to run for the new advisory committee. He would have won easily, but he declined. "I just want to be a dad again," he said simply. "Not a leader, not a face for change, just a dad." And that's what he became. Mornings became slower again. Cartoons returned to the living room. Saturday pancakes replaced depositions and news calls. Jack asked if he could try baseball in the spring, and Jared said yes before the question was even finished. Still, something had shifted in the community. When Jared walked down the block now, people didn't just wave. They looked him in the eye. Some nodded with quiet respect. Others simply said, "Thank you." They weren't talking about the lawsuit, or the trial, or the petition. They were thanking him for standing up when no one else knew how, for reminding them that home means something, for showing what it looks like in the hardest moment to protect what matters most. 6 months had passed. The days had grown longer, the trees greener, and the walls of Jared's home, once heavy with memory, felt lighter again. Not empty, not erased, but lived in. Peaceful. It was a Saturday afternoon, warm and breezy. The windows were open, letting in the scent of cut grass and the distant laughter of kids on bikes. Jack was on the carpet, knees crossed, surrounded by a galaxy of Lego pieces. His latest masterpiece, a 2-level spaceship with lopsided wings, sat proudly at the center. Then a knock, not loud, not rushed, just a single ordinary knock at the door. Jared was at the kitchen table, flipping through a manual for the new grill he never had time to use. The sound made his spine straighten slightly. It wasn't fear, not anymore. It was reflex, muscle memory, the kind that never truly goes away. He stood, not hurried, not alarmed, just aware. He moved to the window first, parted the curtain an inch. Outside stood a delivery driver, holding a small brown box with blue tape. Nothing more, nothing hidden, just someone doing their job. He even waved when he saw Jared peek through that glass. Jared gave a short nod and opened the door. As he signed for the package, he glanced down the street, the same road where police lights had once painted the sidewalks in red and blue. Now it was just calm. A neighbor mowing his lawn, a jogger passing by, a world that had moved on, but inside, something deeper had moved too. He turned back toward the living room. Jack looked up from his project and grinned. "Want to see my new ship, Dad? It's got lasers and a hidden room." Jared smiled, not just at the spaceship, but at what it meant. 6 months ago, Jack had been stacking couch cushions into barriers. He'd watched the door like a guard post. He hadn't played, not really. Now he was building again, imagining again, living again. Jared sat beside him on the rug, the package still unopened on the table behind them. "Tell me about it," he said. Jack's eyes lit up and he launched into a detailed explanation of laser turrets and escape pods. And that's when Jared felt it, quietly, without announcement or fanfare. Victory. Not in a courtroom, not in the eyes of the neighbors, but here on the carpet in Lego bricks and laughter. Because when someone knocked now, he didn't reach for a weapon. Jack didn't hide behind pillows, and the house, their home, felt safe again. That was the win he'd been waiting for.